There is a story moving through royal history channels now. It begins with a chair, a formal dinner, silver laid in perfect lines, crystal catching the light, footmen moving almost without sound. Charles already seated, senior members of the family taking their places according to a choreography older than almost everyone in the room. And then Camilla moves toward a particular chair, not simply an empty chair, the story says, Diana's chair. The place once associated with the woman who had entered St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981 as Lady Diana Spencer and left as the Princess of Wales, the woman whose marriage had collapsed in public. The woman who would later tell a TV audience that there had been 3 people in that marriage. In the viral version, the room freezes. Camilla sits, someone notices, and Queen Elizabeth II does something so unexpected that everyone at the table understands the message. It is a perfect royal story. There is only one problem. I cannot find reliable archival evidence that this dinner confrontation happened. No authenticated seating plan. I could locate records a chair formerly preserved as Diana's. No credible memoir or contemporary report. I found documents the Queen stopping Camilla at a royal dinner for occupying Diana's place. The claim circulates today in social posts and documentary-style videos, but repetition is not verification. And if we are going to tell Diana's story correctly, that distinction matters, because Diana spent years fighting against other people telling the public what her feelings meant. We should not defend her memory by inventing another scene. But here is where the story becomes more interesting. There really was a chair. There really was a royal occasion connected to Diana. There really was a decision involving Camilla. And the empty chair that history can actually document tells us far more about Diana, Camilla, Queen Elizabeth, and the monarchy than the dramatic dinner story ever could. To understand it, we have to go back before the empty chair. Before the memorial, before the marriage of Charles and Camilla. Back to the period when Diana was still alive, still legally connected to the institution, and increasingly unwilling to accept a public version of her marriage that contradicted what she believed she was living. By the early 1990s, the fairy tale had broken apart. Charles and Diana separated in 1992. But separation did not erase the deeper public question. Where did Camilla Parker Bowles fit into the story? In private aristocratic circles, the answer was becoming less hidden. Way A 1993, Vanity Fair account described Camilla as increasingly accepted as Charles's partner among trusted friends and even as a hostess at Highgrove while Diana remained in London with the children. That does not prove every later anecdote told about dinners, chairs, glances, or confrontations, but it does establish something more important. The emotional geography had shifted before the constitutional language caught up. Diana understood that shift. She may not have controlled it. She may not have been able to stop it, but she understood it. And that difference matters. For years, public discussion often treated her distress as if the distress itself were the central problem. Too emotional, too unpredictable, too difficult. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. But when Diana finally spoke openly in the 1995 Times Panorama interview, her description of Charles and Camilla was devastating because it was so simple. She said there were 3 people in the marriage, making it a bit crowded. That line survived because it reduced years of private tension to one image everyone could understand. Crowding. Too many people occupying emotional space that was supposed to belong to 2. And once you understand that image, the legend of Diana's chair becomes psychologically seductive. Of course, people want to believe there was a literal place at a royal table that nobody else was allowed to occupy. Of course, they want the Queen to defend it. A chair can represent what Diana repeatedly feared losing: position, recognition, legitimacy, belonging. But institutions rarely work in symbols as clean as the stories we tell about them afterward. The monarchy did not preserve Diana through a permanently empty dining chair. History was harsher than that. On the 28th of August 1996, Charles and Diana's divorce became final. Diana remained Diana, Princess of Wales, but she no longer used the style Her Royal Highness. She retained a public role and continued major charitable work, yet the formal relationship had changed. 1 year later, everything changed again. On the 31st of August 1997, Diana died in Paris. The reaction in Britain and around the world was enormous. Flowers accumulated outside royal residences, crowds grieved publicly, and the monarchy found itself facing one of the most emotionally dangerous moments of Elizabeth II's reign. The criticism was not merely about protocol, it was about feeling. People wanted to see that the institution understood what had been lost. On the 5th of September 1997, Queen Elizabeth II spoke live to the nation. She called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being, praised her warmth, kindness, energy, commitment to others, and devotion to William and Harry, and said that lessons could be drawn from her life and from the public response to her death. That speech is documented. That tribute is real, and it is more complicated than a queen dramatically ordering someone out of Diana's chair. Elizabeth did not say Diana had been easy. She did not rewrite the breakdown of the marriage. She did not pretend the previous years of conflict had never happened. She did something more institutional. She acknowledged Diana's significance after death in language the public needed to hear. For people who loved Diana, it may have felt late. For the monarchy, it was still a remarkable concession to public emotion. But time did not stop. That is the part of royal history that memorial stories often resist. The dead remain emotionally fixed. Institutions keep moving. Charles's relationship with Camilla did not disappear after Diana's death. It became more carefully managed, then gradually more public. The question was no longer whether Camilla existed in Charles's private life. The question was whether the monarchy could make room for her in its public life without appearing to erase Diana. That process took years, and Queen Elizabeth's actions were not consistent with the fantasy of a permanent forbidden chair. On the 9th of April 2005, Charles and Camilla married in a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall. The Queen did not attend the civil ceremony itself, but she and Prince Philip attended the later service of prayer and dedication at St. George's Chapel, and the Queen hosted the reception at Windsor Castle. Think about what that means. If the viral dinner legend were true in the moral sense people give it, if Elizabeth had decided that Camilla must never occupy any symbolic space once associated with Diana, then 2005 makes no sense. But institutions do not usually choose between memory and continuity. They absorb contradiction. The Queen could publicly honor Diana's memory in 1997, and 8 years later, host the reception after Charles married Camilla. Both things happened. Neither cancels the other. This is where the story stops behaving like a revenge drama and starts revealing how monarchy actually survives. It does not survive by freezing history. It survives by converting private catastrophe into new protocol. Names change, titles change, seating changes, photographs change, the people standing on balconies change, the institution remains, and then 2 years after Charles and Camilla's wedding, the chair appears, not Diana's chair, Camilla's. In 2007, William and Harry organized a service to mark the 10th anniversary of their mother's death. Camilla was invited. She initially intended to attend. Her presence quickly became controversial because many members of the public still associated her with the destruction of Charles and Diana's marriage. Then Camilla withdrew. In a statement issued through Clarence House, she said she was touched to have been invited by William and Harry, but concluded that her attendance could divert attention from the purpose of the occasion. Reuters and contemporary reporting documented her decision to stay away. So when the service took place on the 31st August 2007, 10 years to the day after Diana's death, Camilla was absent. That is the documented empty chair story. And notice the reversal. The internet legend tells us Camilla took Diana's place and the Queen stopped her. The historical record gives us something subtler. Camilla had a place at an event honoring Diana, then decided not to occupy it. No public rebuke from the Queen, no theatrical command. No servant pulling back a chair, no room full of frozen aristocrats. Just absence, and absence had always carried enormous power in Diana's story. An unanswered call, a separate bedroom, a husband elsewhere. A family that often communicated through formality when she wanted emotional clarity. An empty place can say more than a confrontation because everyone is forced to supply the meaning themselves. Was Camilla's withdrawal an act of respect? Was it political necessity? Was it protection for William and Harry? Was it an acknowledgement that Diana's memorial could not also become a referendum on Camilla? The documented statement gives us the practical reason. She did not want her presence to distract from the service. Anything beyond that is interpretation, and interpretation must remain interpretation. But the symbolism is difficult to miss. For one day, at one service, the woman who had eventually married Charles chose not to enter the room where Diana's memory was the central presence. Diana did not need a reserved chair. The entire occasion belonged to her, and Queen Elizabeth attended. So did Charles, so did William and Harry. The monarchy that had struggled so visibly with Diana in life was participating in the preservation of her memory in death. Not perfectly, not without contradiction, but publicly. Then the years moved again. Camilla continued royal work. Her position became less tentative. The institution that once seemed unable to imagine how to acknowledge her eventually integrated her completely. By 2018, at Charles's 70th birthday celebration, Queen Elizabeth gave a toast at Buckingham Palace and spoke of her son being sustained by his wife Camilla. That sentence matters because it was not whispered at a private dinner. It was official. The Queen was no longer merely tolerating a difficult arrangement around her heir. She was publicly describing Camilla as a source of support in Charles's life. And then came February 2022. Elizabeth It was approaching the 70th anniversary of her accession. Her reign had survived decolonization, political upheaval, family scandal, the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage, Diana's death and decades of debate over Camilla. In an official Accession Day message, the Queen looked toward the future reign of her son. Then she made the decision that settled the question. She said it was her sincere wish that when Charles became king, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort. There it was. Not a chair, a crown. If you want to understand why the viral dinner story is so emotionally satisfying, place it beside that sentence. In the imagined story, Queen Elizabeth protects Diana's symbolic place from Camilla. In the documented story, Queen Elizabeth ultimately supports Camilla's future place beside Charles on the throne. That does not mean the Queen rejected Diana's memory. Her 1997 tribute remains part of the record. It means monarchy separates remembrance from succession. Diana could be cherished. Camilla could be accepted. Charles could become king. The institution could carry all three truths without admitting that any one of them erased the others. For viewers who love Diana, that can feel unbearable. Because human emotion does not organize itself like constitutional continuity. A person thinks, if Diana suffered because of this relationship, how can the same institution later legitimize it? A monarchy thinks differently. A marriage ended, a divorce became final, a person died. Years passed, the heir remarried, the new wife performed duties, the sovereign recognized the new reality. That logic can feel cold because it is designed to outlive individual pain. And this is where Diana's story resists simplification. She was neither the saint created after death, nor the unstable caricature used against her in life. She could be wounded, angry, strategic, impulsive, compassionate, suspicious, funny, and effective in public. The archive becomes valuable because it refuses to flatten her. It allows us to see a woman reacting to a marriage, a family, a press culture, and a role that demanded composure while her life was disintegrating. To remember her honestly is not to deny complexity. It is to stop using complexity as an excuse to dismiss what she perceived correctly. The strongest defense of Diana is not mythology. It is evidence, context, and the courage to leave uncertainty where the record leaves uncertainty. And perhaps that is the real story hidden inside the chair legend. People invent the moment they wish history had given them. They want a queen who saw the room, understood the wound, and drew a visible line. Not there. Not that chair. Not her place. Because Diana's admirers know how often she described feeling displaced, misunderstood, or treated as a problem inside a system built around restraint. They want one scene where the system itself says, "We remember, but there was no need to invent one." The real record already contains a stronger moment. September 1997, the Queen looks into a TV camera after days of extraordinary public grief. Diana is dead. The monarchy has been criticized. William and Harry are children who have lost their mother, and Elizabeth says that Diana was exceptional and gifted. She says she admired and respected her. She says Diana will not be forgotten. That is not the same as vindicating every claim Diana made. It is not an apology. It is not a confession, but it is an acknowledgement from the sovereign that the woman who had become one of the institution's greatest internal challenges had also become one of the defining figures of the age. Then, 10 years later, there is another room, a memorial service, a place where Camilla could have sat, and she does not. Not because Diana's name is carved into the chair, because sometimes history creates a boundary without anyone touching the furniture. Camilla understood that her presence could become the story, so she removed herself from it. For that service, Diana's memory occupied all the available space, and maybe that is why we should be careful with stories that sound too perfect. The truth does not need extra cruelty to make Diana sympathetic. It does not need fabricated humiliation to make her pain meaningful. It does not need to turn Queen Elizabeth into a secret avenger. And it does not need to turn Camilla into a woman wandering through palaces trying to steal chairs. The documented history is already painful enough. Diana married into the most famous royal family in the world at 20 years old. Her official royal biography records the 1981 wedding and the public role that followed. Her marriage failed under extraordinary public scrutiny. She described the emotional damage openly. She and Charles divorced. She died at 36. Her death produced grief on a scale that forced the monarchy to respond in a new emotional language. Her former husband later married Camilla. The Queen hosted their reception. Camilla later withdrew from Diana's 10th anniversary memorial because her presence risked overshadowing it. And eventually Elizabeth II publicly endorsed Camilla as the future Queen Consort. Those are not clean facts. They do not form a fairy tale. They form something more human. Contradiction. The Queen could respect Diana and accept Camilla. William and Harry could invite Camilla to a service for their mother, and Camilla could decide not to attend. The monarchy could memorialize the woman it had struggled to contain, and later crown the woman who had once been central to the collapse of that woman's marriage. History does not always deliver justice in a single scene. Sometimes it delivers memory, and memory is harder to control. Diana's chair was never the important thing. Her place was. That place was not ultimately secured by protocol, by marriage, by a title, or by where anyone sat at dinner. It was secured in photographs people kept, in the causes she made visible, in the recollections of people who met her, in the words she chose to put on record, in the sons who continued to speak of her as their mother, in the millions who still measure royal history as before Diana and after Diana. A physical chair can be taken, a title can be removed, a household can change, a marriage can end, but memory is not a seat assigned by a palace. No equerry can move it, no seating plan can revise it, no new marriage can automatically erase it, and perhaps that is the ending the viral story was reaching for without knowing how to say it. Imagine the last room again, not the invented royal dinner, the memorial. The chair Camilla might have occupied remains empty. The Queen is present. Charles is present. William and Harry are present. Diana is not. And yet the entire reason they are there is Diana. That is the paradox. The absent woman is the central presence. 10 years after her death, she still determines who enters the room, who stays away, what is said, what is remembered, and what becomes too distracting to allow. No dramatic order from the Queen was required. No one had to say, that is Diana's chair. History had already said something larger. This is Diana's memory, and for that day everyone else had to sit around it. If Diana mattered to you, preserve her story carefully. Not by making the record more dramatic than it was, but by refusing to let myth replace evidence. Share the stories that can be sourced. Question the ones that arrive perfectly packaged. And remember the woman beneath the royal symbolism, not a chair, not a crown, not a scandal, but a human being whose voice survived long enough to complicate the institution that once struggled to contain it.